Once again, welcome to each one of you. Now, I request Chandni Gupta ji to take up the technical session.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir, and welcome to everyone. Uh, First of all, glad to be a part of this session. Again, it's always a pleasure to do a session with Sumit sir, and it's a very good initiative to start this certificate course on Indes. I think this will be very enriching and very useful to each one of you. Now, regarding this session, today we will be discussing about India's, the background particularly and where they've come from and what are the major changes they've brought and particularly the hot topic that is going on regarding Schedule 3. Because MC has notified a latest amendment on 24th March 2021. So we will be discussing that in detail. So regarding queries, I would suggest you send in your queries and we will take up the queries at the end of the session. And meanwhile, during the session, I request you all to please shut your audio and video off. Whatever the queries we have, you can send over the chat and we can take up. Okay, so I'll just quickly share my screen and my PPT. Yeah. Hope my screen is available.
Yes, Chandni. Yes.
Okay. Great. So yes, as I said, the agenda of this session is first of all to start with the background of Indies, where they've come from, what is the applicability, what is the major impact that they have brought on the Indian financial statements, right? To have an overview of all the standards and what are the major impacts. Right, then we will move on to the second part of this session, that is on Schedule 3 particularly. I will take you through the entire journey of Schedule 3, what major amendments have brought in, and obviously the latest amendment that has come, right? We will discuss that in detail. So let's start. So first of all, okay, so we can make this session a little bit interactive, right? And what I can do is just a minute. Huh? Okay, I cannot pull on the chat. I cannot view the chat side by side. Okay, I will view the chat whenever I ask you guys a question because I want to we'll try to make this a little bit interactive. So we'll try to view the chat whenever there is any.
Chat box is not visible to you, Chandni?
No, it is, but I cannot operate the PPT while the chat box.
Right.
Yeah.
But pop-up will be there. Anybody will post a query, then pop-up definitely it will be there.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So okay, let's start. So basically, as we speak, there are two major, like the most prominent standards, set of standards in the world are IFRS and US GAAP. Right. IFRS are basically UK-based standards. These are developed and issued by IASB. Right. And these are basically the penetration of IFRS is like greater than 70%. Okay, so when I say this, I mean that more than 70% of the countries in the world either permit or require the use of IFRS for the financial statements. Okay, the second part is US GAAP. These are majorly used in US only, and these are issued by FASB. Right? These are basically FASB is basically Financial Accounting Standards Board, which is a US based organization. Okay, so these two boards are the most prominent and the biggest boards in the world which are developing accounting standards. And so basically these two standards are different in their own ways, but back in 2002, then 2006 and 2008, these two boards signed a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, to align these two standards, these two set of standards, and to agree on a single set of uniform standard across the world, right? Why? In order to bring harmony, in order to bring comparability, understandability, and ease of comparison for the investors across the globe, right? So basically, yeah. So first of all, since like it's been so many years that Indias have been introduced. So I suppose everyone knows that Indias are majorly based on IFRS and not US GAAP. Right, so we will discuss in detail about IFRS and not US GAAP. So IFRS, as I said, are developed by IASB, right? And they comprise of IFRS, IAS, IFRIC, and SIC. Now, what are all these? So basically, in 2001 till 2001, instead of IASB, which is the board, there was a committee called International Accounting Standards Committee, IASC. So whatever standards this committee developed were termed as IAS, International Accounting Standards, right? And after 2000, like in 2001, IASB was formed and IASC, the committee, was demolished, right? So instead of committee, the board was formed. So whatever standards the board developed or issued were called as IFRS. So basically, it's nothing but the IAS and IFRS, a single set of standards, right? So IASB adopted all the IAS that were developed by the committee. Now, these are the statement or the standards, but the committee or the board also issues some interpretations, right? These are called IFRIC, which are developed by IASB, and SIC, which were developed by IASC, which was the former committee, right? So all these interpretations also form integral part of the standards. Hence, cumulatively, IFRS, IAS, IFRIC, and SIC, these are cumulatively called as IFRS. So whenever IFRS is mentioned, it does not mean just IFRS 1, 2, 3 or whatever, but also IAS and the interpretations. Now, India has converged with IFRS. Now, when I say converged, it means that they have not completely adopted IFRS, but they have made certain changes, certain amendments that were required considering the Indian economy. Because IFRS are developed considering different economies, right? But India is like particularly a different economy. It has variable, it has its own diversity, right? So the IFRS were not could not be adopted as is. Although there are not major or many changes, but obviously wherever required, wherever seemed appropriate, the changes were made. This is called convergence, right? So about adoption and convergence, basically some countries have adopted IFRS. So places like Australia, Hong Kong, they have as is adopted the IFRS. So many countries have adopted IFRS as it is. So India, when converged with IFRS, made certain changes, as I said, right? These changes could be of three types. Number one is carve out. Now, what are carve out? Carve out is basically certain deviation or departure or like a different treatment which is given in IFRS, but India has decided to deviate from that treatment, right? Other is carve in, which means that an additional guidance has been inserted in the text. That means the IFRS was not giving that particular treatment, but India has inserted that treatment. Then curtailment of options. It means that IFRS was giving certain options for a particular transaction, that how it can be treated in the books of accounts. But India has decided to curtail those options and decided to go with only one treatment, right? Say, for example, fair value of investment property, right? So in IFRS, investment property can be measured at fair value or cost. But in India, Indians have curtailed the option of fair value, and investment property can be valued at cost only. So this is called curtailment of options. Okay, so now I hope we all understand that India has converged with IFRS and not just adopted IFRS. Yeah. So Indians were notified on 16th February 2015, and they were made effective from 1st April 2015. Right now, about the about the application or the applicability, it was not applicable to all the companies right from 1st April 2015, but MCA also notified a phased manner implementation or a roadmap for implementation of Ind AS that we will discuss in later slides. But this is to tell you that from 1st April 2015, right, not all the companies were required to comply with Ind AS, because from 1st April 2015, the companies were asked to apply it voluntarily. Okay, so for the year 15-16, none of the company was forced to apply Ind AS. Okay, so the roadmap we will discuss in later slides. Yeah, so about the structure of the standards, there are 40 IFRS which includes IAS, and as against 40 IFRS we have 39 Ind AS. Okay, so as I told you that IFRIC and SIC, these are the interpretations that are the integral part of these standards, the IFRS. But in India, what we have done is we have given these interpretations as an appendix to Ind AS. So if you have seen the bare text of the standard of the Ind AS, you must have seen certain appendix, right? So these appendix are, they form an integral part of the standard. So instead of having two documents, which is the case with IFRS, in Ind AS, we have only one document for the complete standard plus the interpretation. So I have just given the list of applicable standards. It's just for your view. When you get the PPT, maybe you can just refer it. Yeah. So 1st April 2015 was the most important and the most crucial date in the history of accounting in India, right? On 1st April, as on 1st April 2015, we had two sets of gaps. That means in India, the companies had two sets of standards in front of them. Now they had to decide as per the guidance given by the government that whether they have to apply the previous gap or the Ind AS, right? So pre 1st April 2015, we just had single set of gap, which is the accounting standards, which were notified in 2006. Right, and after 1st April 2015, we have those accounting standards called now the IGAP and Ind AS. Now, yeah. So basically now about the roadmap for implementation of Ind AS. First of all, on 16th February 2015, when MCA notified the standards along with the roadmap for implementation, the roadmap was notified for companies other than banking, insurance, and NBFCs. Okay, so as on 16th February 2015, no one had any idea about banking, insurance, and NBFCs applicability to Ind AS. Now, this is the old implementation guidance, because now we are standing in 2021, and as we speak, all the listed companies and all the companies having net worth of rupees 250 crores or more are applying Ind AS on a mandatory basis. Now, whenever Ind AS is applicable on certain company, its holding company, its subsidiary, its joint venture, and its associate companies are also required to comply with Ind AS. At least for the consolidated financial statements, they are required to prepare Ind AS friendly data. Okay. Also to tell you that Ind AS, once applicable, will be applicable for all the subsequent years. So say in 2017, a company had a net worth of 600 crores, right? Ind AS were applicable, but in subsequent years, the net worth became even negative. It does not mean that Ind AS do not apply in the negative net worth. It will apply, because once Ind AS is applicable, it will be applicable for all the subsequent years. Now, about NBFCs, we got notification on 30th March 2016. So after 1 year, we got the notification which which gave us the roadmap for implementation of NBFCs. As on 31st March 2016, also we had no idea about banking and insurance because this was not applicable on banking or insurance companies. Now, but about NBFCs, the voluntary option was not given to NBFCs, only the mandatory adoption was given. And from 1st April 2018, for the NBFCs which were listed or unlisted, having net worth of rupees 500 crores or more. And from 1st April 2019, for all the listed NBFCs and unlisted NBFCs which were having a net worth of rupees 250 crores or more. And again, in this case also, if Ind AS is applicable on, say, one NBFC company, then its holding subsidiary, joint venture, or associate company will also be required to comply with Ind AS. Now, about insurance and banking companies. So basically, as we all know, that banking companies are regulated by RBI and insurance companies are regulated by IRDA. So these two organizations or authorities notified the roadmap for applicability of Ind AS, but however, they postponed it and it has now been deferred to, like there is no certainty when it will be applied on banking or insurance companies. And the point to be noted is that these companies are not even allowed to voluntarily apply. Okay, they are just not allowed to apply Ind AS. Now, one question may arise from this, that what if a company, say a NBFC, has an associate which is a banking company? Now, what will happen in this case? Okay, so I've got a question. Current status on NBFCs, unlisted NBFCs less than 25 crore net worth, 250 crores net worth. Yes. So they are not allowed to apply Ind AS. Okay, so about my question, please tell me if a company has an associate which is a banking company. What do you guys think? What will happen for the consolidated financial statements? How the consolidated financial statements will be prepared? Why? Because NBFC is required to apply Ind AS, but the banking company is not required to apply or is not allowed to apply Ind AS. Given your answers, what do you think? Will the consolidated financial statements be okay? Will the consolidated financial statements be prepared as per Ind AS, or there will be two financial statements as per Ind AS and for banking associate as per IGAAP? What will happen? Okay. Okay. Given your answers, please, let's just make it a little bit interactive wherever we can. Okay, so I've got two answers wherein first is they need to submit another set for consolidation, and another is for the purpose of consolidation they need okay, I'm getting too many answers now. Two set of financials. They need to prepare two set. Okay. IFRS will be applicable. Okay. Okay. So let me tell you what happened in this case. If a NBFC has a banking associate, in that case, the banking associate will have to provide Ind AS compliant information for the NBFC to prepare Ind AS consolidated financial statements. Now, in this case, I will show you an example. This is the extract from the financial statements of HDFC, which is a NBFC, and it has a banking associate, which is HDFC Bank. Now, if you can read, when I give you the PPT, maybe you can read it completely. But what this extract says is, HDFC Bank Limited, for the purposes of its statutory compliance, prepares and presents its financial statements or results under the historical cost convention and accrual basis. That means the IGAAP. The statutory requirements prescribed under the banking regulations, circulars and guidance issued by RBI and all. Basically, it's saying that the HDFC Bank Limited is preparing its financials as per IGAAP. Okay. But in the second para, if you read what it says, HDFC Bank Limited, being an associate of Housing Development Finance Corporation Limited, has prepared this consolidated financial information fit for consolidation information. This is what we call the information wherein Ind AS is not applicable. Fit for consolidation information in accordance with the recognition and measurement principles of Ind AS, for the purposes of preparing the consolidated financial statements or results of the corporation. So basically, whenever there is such a case, when the organization has to prepare consolidated financial statements, but one of the component or the entity is not Ind AS compliant, then that entity will have to provide a fit for consolidation information to the parent organization. I hope it's clear to everyone now. Okay, so I've got one query. Can private limited company apply Ind AS voluntarily? Yes, of course it can apply voluntarily. I hope it's not an NBFC. Okay, so under Ind AS, there are 7 components to a financial statements. Basically, whenever we say financial statements under Ind AS, there has to be these 7 components. Otherwise, that is not a complete set of financial statement under Ind AS. Now, some of these statements we are already aware of, like balance sheet. Everyone knows what balance sheet is. Statement of profit and loss. That is also something which everyone is aware of. Third statement might seem a little different and alien to some people who have not heard about this before. Statement of changes in equity. Okay, so this is an additional statement that is required to be prepared for companies which are preparing statements under Ind AS. Basically, what is this statement? This statement is nothing, but it shows the reconciliation of opening and closing balance of the equity share capital and reserves and surplus, or the other equity. Okay, so in Ind AS, before Ind AS, there was just a schedule for equity share capital and reserves and surplus. But under Ind AS, it's a separate statement altogether. Okay, so it just shows the reconciliation or the flow from opening to closing balances of the equity share capital and other equity. The fourth statement is statement of cash flows. Fifth, notes, as everyone is aware of. Sixth is comparative information. And seventh is the third balance sheet. So this is also a different concept in Ind AS. What happens is, whenever there is a change in accounting policy and the company company is applying that policy retrospectively, or there is a retrospective restatement of any item in the financial statements, or whenever there is a reclassification, okay, or whenever there is a prior period error, okay, in all these cases, a third balance sheet is required to be given. Now, what is a third balance sheet? For example, for year 2021, the company will prepare balance sheet as on 31st March 2021. Comparative information will be given for 31st March 2020. But just in case the company has applied an accounting policy retrospectively, then the company will also provide balance sheet as on 1st April 2019. Okay, so this is the third balance sheet. 1st April 2019, 31st March 2020, and 31st March 2021. These 3 balance sheets will be required to be prepared whenever there is any situation out of these 3-4. Hope it's clear to everyone. If there is any doubt, you can put in your queries. Either we'll take up now or we'll take up after the session. Okay, no queries. Moving on. Now we will discuss what are the major impact or the major changes that Ind AS has brought on the financial statements. First of all, the format of financial statements has been turned upside down. What does it mean? Now, whenever there is a financial statement in front of you, you can upfront tell whether the company is applying Ind AS or IGAAP. How? In IGAAP, the equity and liability was shown first and then assets were shown later on. But in Ind AS, assets come first and then equity and liabilities come. So there is a very prima facie view that whether the company is complying with Ind AS or is it still applying IGAAP. Second, explicit and unreserved statement of compliance with all Ind AS is required in the notes. So this is a requirement in Ind AS. Earlier, what happened is only the auditor was required to give this in its report, that whether the company is complying with, whether the company is giving a true and fair view, and whether it's complying by true and fair view means that it's complying with all the standards, right? This was the responsibility of the auditors. But now this responsibility has been put on the management to put in a statement in the notes to the financial statements that whether the company is applying with all complying with all the Ind AS or not. And by all the Ind AS, we mean all the Ind AS that are applicable to the company. If it's missing even one Ind AS, that means this statement is null and void. And the auditor will have to report this non-compliance in its audit report. Okay, so this is a very, very important and one of the major changes that Ind AS has brought on the financial statements, because it adds on an additional responsibility on the management, we can say. Now, the concept of third balance sheet, as I just told you, that it is required to be prepared in case there is a retrospective adjustment, or when there is a prior period correction of errors, or there's a reclassification of items. Then statement of changes in equity, as I told you, there's an additional statement added in the complete set of financial statements. It is required to be prepared under Ind AS. Please elaborate on third balance sheet. Okay, so third balance sheet, basically what happens is, why third balance sheet is prepared. Third balance sheet is prepared to get the restated opening balances, if we understand in very layman language. Because if you get the opening restated, whatever changes you have done, whatever retrospective adjustments you have done, okay, and if you get the opening restated balances, it's easier to show the comparisons or the adjustments each year, right? Because there is no mid-year adjustment, because you have the restated opening balances. That is why this third balance sheet has been brought. Because if there is any, say there is a correction, okay, I've got a query. Can you tell about opening balance sheet with some examples, as I've seen all Ind AS balance sheet first time with 3 comparatives. Any case where you believe there will be no opening balance sheet preparation requirement. Okay, yes. So basically what happens is, at the time of first time adoption of Ind AS, third balance sheet is prepared. Okay, and when the company is applying with Ind AS, like it's not the first time of the company, then third balance sheet is prepared only in these cases. So if I had, maybe I could show you one example. Okay, wait. I will just try to show you a practical example in this case. I can show you a financial statement of a listed company. Maybe it will help you understand. Yeah. Okay. So I have this balance sheet of Hindustan Unilever for the financial year 16-17. Okay, and they have applied Ind AS from 1st April 2016. Now this is the balance sheet. I hope you all can see. As on 31st March 2017. This is the first time when the company has applied Ind AS. Okay, so as per Ind AS, 31st March 17 balances are given. 31st March 16 balances are given. Why? Because the comparative information is required to be given. Then 1st April 2015, which is the date of transition, basically as per Ind AS. So I hope you have attended this session of Nisha ma'am, in which she explained the implementation of Ind AS. In that session, you must have heard about the date of transition. So in this case, for HUL, the date of transition is 1st April 2015. So as per Ind AS 101, the company is also required to give an opening balances or the third balance sheet as on the date of transition. Okay, I hope this helps you understand how the balances are presented. Now, after the first time adoption, I will give you an example. After the first time adoption, how it goes. Say the company has changed its accounting policy of valuation of inventory. Okay, it has gone from FIFO to weighted average. Now, what happens? What happens is the company has to apply this policy retrospectively, right? Say standing in 2021, 31st March 2021, the company has changed the policy. Now, for all the impact that is till 31st March 2019 of the change in accounting policy of changing the method from FIFO to weighted average will be taken in the inventory balance as on 31st March 2019. And it will be reflected in the third balance sheet. Inventory will be reflected in the third balance sheet as per weighted average method. And after that, 1920 balances will be restated as per weighted average, and 2021 balances will be restated as per weighted average. I hope this helps you understand. Any further query on third balance sheet? I am unable to open my chat box. Please confirm if you have any queries. Maybe we can take up, otherwise we'll move on. Can you confirm that? Yes, so Yogesh, the third balance sheet will be mandatory from moving from IGAAP to Ind AS. If you have attended Nisha ma'am's session, she has explained very well that how the conversion from IGAAP to Ind AS is done, and how the third balance sheet as on date of transition, as I showed you in the case of Hindustan Unilever, 1st April 2015 was the date of transition. The third balance sheet is given. So it is mandatory to give third balance sheet when moving from IGAAP to Ind AS. Okay. Okay, great. Now we will move on. Another concept we are here. Another concept that has been introduced with Ind AS is OCI, other comprehensive income. I'm sure many of you would have heard about this concept, this term OCI, but it is very difficult to understand what this actually means, because to be honest, this statement does not have any meaning as such. Okay, it is not explained anywhere. It just tells you, Ind AS just tells you what are the components of OCI. Yes, Uma, I am explaining this. Okay, means if company change in accounting policies, then third balance sheet is mandatory. Yes, because accounting policies are to be taken retrospective impact, right? Accounting policies are to be retrospectively applied, and hence, whenever there is a change in accounting policy, third balance sheet is mandatory. Right. So about other comprehensive income, I'm moving on now. If you have any queries related to third balance sheet, we'll take up after the session. Other comprehensive income is basically in the statement of profit and loss. There are two sections now. The first section shows you the profit or loss for the year, and the second section shows you the other comprehensive income. Now, what is this other comprehensive income? Basically, in this section, the items which do not flow from the P&L, these are only included in the other comprehensive income. And this other comprehensive income forms part of other equity, right? As we formerly it was called as reserves and surplus. Now, and in Ind AS it is called as other equity. So other comprehensive income forms part of other equity. Now, what are the items that are shown in OCI? Like fair value, the revaluation of PPE or the property, plant and equipment. Whenever there is a revaluation of PPE, the change, the revalue profit or the gain or loss is shown in OCI and not in PNL. Okay, whenever there is an upside, a gain in the revaluation, it is shown in OCI and not in PNL. Similarly, whenever there is a fair value changes in a certain item. So if I don't want to quote items here because the session is on Monday for financial instruments, but assume that whenever there is a change, fair value change in the investment in equity shares, it is shown in OCI. Okay, I've got one question. Fair value adjustment for cumulative convertible debentures will come in OCI. Okay, so cumulative. So first of all, cumulative convertible debentures, you will have to classify these debentures into either equity or liability. Why? Because this could be a hybrid or a compound financial instrument. So the changes in the liability part will go to P&L. Why? Because the financial liabilities are always classified as fair value through P&L or amortized cost. It does not go to OCI ever. Uma is asking, is that mean all items form part of non-cash or notional in nature? Not necessarily, because depreciation is also non-cash, but it does not come in OCI. It goes to P&L only. This is a very different concept. Basically, when you, particularly when you will take up this session on Monday on financial instruments, you will get more clarity on this concept, because OCI is mostly used in financial instruments. So if you attend that session, you will get more clarity on this. Right now, I can only tell you that certain items of income and expenses which are not routed through P&L, which are not allowed to be routed through P&L as per the standards, these come only in OCI. The example that I gave you, revaluation of PPE, fair value changes in the investment in equity shares. These such nature of items come in OCI. Actuarial valuation and gratuity. Yes, the actuarial valuation, only the actuarial gain or loss comes in OCI. I hope all the questions have been answered on this concept. Can we move on? Okay. Why cash flow hedge in OCI and not fair value hedge? Okay, so basically fair value cash flow hedge comes in OCI only for the effective portion of it, right? And not the fair value hedge. Fair value hedge is mostly what I can comprehend. It's my personal opinion. What I can comprehend is because fair value hedge is to hedge the fair value changes in P&L. So if you take the changes in fair value on hedge in OCI, then how are you going to hedge the impact on P&L? Say if there is a negative 100 rupees in your P&L and you have hedged that negative 100 rupees, but the gain of rupees 100 on hedge, you take it to OCI, then there is a negative in P&L and positive in OCI. It will never knock off, right? So we have to understand why the hedge has been taken. What is the purpose of it? What are we protecting? What are we hedging? Right? What is the objective behind it? So fair value hedges are mostly for that, to hedge the fair value changes in P&L. That's why the changes are taken to P&L only and not to OCI. Great. Okay, so now moving on. The next change that Ind AS has brought is the classification of assets and liabilities into financial and non-financial. Again, this is a concept which is related to your Monday session, but I'm going to give you a brief view. So basically, all the assets and liabilities are already being bifurcated into current and non-current. But now further we have to bifurcate it into financial or non-financial. Ind AS 32, 107, 109. These three standards particularly are applied in this case because these three standards relate to financial instruments and they guide you what is a financial instrument. So just to give you an example, say trade receivables, loans and advances, cash and cash equivalent. So anything which gives you a right to receive cash or any other financial asset, or it puts you in an obligation to deliver some cash or a financial asset, that is a financial instrument. There has to be a contract, there has to be a right to receive, an obligation to pay. Okay, only those items will be financial instruments. And now all the items will have to be bifurcated into financial and non-financial and has to be presented separately on the face of balance sheet. Hope it's clear. Although you will get to understand this in more detail in the Monday session. I'm again and again saying this because Monday session should be very, very important. Tomorrow's session is also very, very important because revenue is one standard which is the biggest standard and is widely used. And the Monday session is very vital for Ind AS because Ind AS now is more about financial instruments and fair value and all these concepts. Right, so you can imagine there are whole three standards on this concept, financial instruments, entire three standards. So obviously this is a very important topic. Okay, so moving on. The third requirement or the change that Ind AS has brought is a disclosure requirement, which is to disclose the changes in liabilities arising from financing activities. These need to be given. Okay, hold on. I've got a query. Government subsidy is financial or non-financial? So basically, financial and non-financial, the items which are contractual can only be financial or only financial. Only contractual obligation or right will be financial, and government subsidy is not contractual. It is not a contract between two parties. It is some statutory allowance or a benefit that is given from the government. So it is non-financial. Yeah, so about this disclosure of changes in liability. So basically in the statement of cash flows, earlier this was not required, but now a separate table is given basically to show the changes in liabilities from the financing activities, because generally what happens is the changes in forex is not clearly understandable from the statement of cash flows. Hence this requirement was brought in by the government so that the changes of forex and the changes due to interest payment and all is clearly visible and understandable from the this particular disclosure. Okay. Moving on. Another change is non-adjusting events occurring after the reporting date or reporting period are disclosed in financial statements, whereas in IGAAP it was disclosed in report of approving authority. So this is one minor change. So earlier what happened was non-adjusting in case of subsequent events after the reporting period, the non-adjusting events which were not required to be adjusted in the financial statements were disclosed in the report of the approving authority. But now in Ind AS, you have to disclose those events in the financial statements itself. Next is the discounting of provisions is required in Ind AS. If the effect of the time value of money is material. So basically, the provisions were never discounted. It was never a requirement and was never even today in India, it is not a mandatory requirement. There is a condition attached to it. If the time value of money is material, then only you discount the provisions. Otherwise, there is no need to discount the provisions. But for the companies for which the time value of money is material, for those companies, it is a major change. Why? Because this will it will impact their financials, right? There will be finance cost in their financials every year now, because discounting means you first of all discount it and then you add the interest to it. So yes, this was a change brought in by Ind AS. Next, the bifurcation of compound financial instruments. So someone asked me about the convertible, cumulative convertible debentures, right? This is an example of compound financial instrument. Basically, the financial instruments which have a component of equity and liability both, these are to be bifurcated now, and the equity part is shown in equity and the liability part is shown in liability. Now, what is the impact of it? Earlier, you guys tell me, where did you see the preference shares? Say a company has issued preference shares. Where did you see those preference shares in the financial statements or in the balance sheet? Can you tell me where the preference shares were shown or disclosed in balance sheet earlier? Equity, share capital, okay. Equity, right? But now under Ind AS, it will be liability. Why? Because it depends upon the nature of the preference shares. Say if these are the convertible preference shares, and then in that case, the company will have to bifurcate the portion of these preference shares into equity and liability. And the liability will go to the liability part and the equity part will go to the equity. So this is one critical change. Why? Because this will impact the financial ratios. Because earlier, since it was in equity, now it has come to the liability. So financial ratios like debt equity, interest coverage ratio, these ratios will change like drastically, right? And also when you add it to liability, there will be some finance cost attached to it. So there will be some impact on the P&L also. So this is, I'm telling you, the concept of financial instruments is so vital and so impacting, and it has literally changed all the ratios, all the financials of the companies. The companies which have major financial instruments, debentures, preference shares, and loans, all these instruments have a different accounting treatment now. Okay, so Uma is asking, what is the impact of discounting of provision? How does it improve the reliability of financials? As there is it's an estimation basically. Yes, I agree with you, Ma. It is definitely an estimation, and there is no, it does not improve any reliability. That is why this condition has been attached to it, that when the effect of time value of money is material, then only you discount the provisions. Otherwise, it's not required. Surya is asking, any exceptions are there? I mean, I want to show as equity only. No, there is no exception. Obviously, there are criterias, right? There are different criterias to evaluate whether a financial instrument is a compound instrument or not. And that, to understand that, it will take a whole lot of session. So for now, what I can tell you is, if it qualifies the definition of a compound financial instrument, no, there is no option to show it as equity only. Hope it helps. Moving on. Application of fair value concept, right? So basically, under Ind AS, there is a separate standard for fair values, Ind AS 113, which provides all the guidance on fair value. So now you can understand, if there is a standard on fair value, then how much the fair value is used across the standards. Like right from like financial instrument is completely based on fair value. Then you have business combination and share based payments, right? That has a different definition of fair value, but still. So there is a wide usage of fair value across all the standards. So what I can comprehend from this is that now the management needs to be very aware about the market. It needs to regularly monitor what are the changes in the fair values and how it is going to impact the financial statements, right? And that is why what I can understand is the usage of hedging has increased, because if the fair value changes will keep on impacting financials, the PNL will become so volatile that, you know, every year there's a change in fair value, and there's a huge impact of change in fair value on PNL. Then how do you understand what is the actual profit from operations if the major impact is due to fair value, right? That is also one reason that fair values, the changes in fair values taken to OCI, to understand the actual profit or loss from the operations, so that the major fair value changes is not impacting the PNL, right? To reduce the volatility in the PNL, I think the fair value concept is very important, and the management, the company needs to regularly monitor this and understand the impact of it, and try to hedge this or try to protect its PNL from the volatility. Okay, I will just turn off this chat box right now. Yeah. Now, moving on, obviously the Ind AS has brought in extensive disclosure requirements. I think earlier, as per IGAP, the financials were not very lengthy, but now as per Ind AS, I think the financials are very lengthy because of the extensive disclosure requirements. There are separate standards for disclosures only. Ind AS 107 for financial instruments, Ind AS 112 for in case of consolidated financial statements, right? These two standards are principally based on disclosures only. They tell you the disclosure requirements only. So I think Ind AS requires a lot of disclosure. It brings out a lot of transparency, and it's good in a way, but obviously it adds a lot of additional responsibilities for the management. Okay, moving on. Next change that I feel is the substance of a transaction is valued over its legal form, what we call as substance over form. Earlier also this concept was there in IGAP, in the framework of IGAP, but it was never implemented in the standards per se, right? But now under Ind AS, the standards are completely based on substance over form. There is no rule to say how much revenue to recognize or how much value to book in PNL, right? There is no rule. There is a principle basis which you have to evaluate or analyze a transaction, and then you have to figure out how much needs to go to PNL. Okay, that is one of the major differences. The IGAP is more rule based, but Ind AS are more principle based standards. So in Ind AS, the standards like 115 revenue, which is you are going to be learned tomorrow, is so wide, is so extensive. In this, earlier what happens was there was a particular rule that, okay, if you have transferred the risk and reward, recognize the revenue. But now, as per Ind AS 115, revenue is recognized basis five steps. Okay, if those 5 steps are fulfilled, then only you can recognize the revenue. So obviously there is a lot of evaluation and analysis which is required from the management side to finally conclude on any particular accounting treatment of a transaction. Similarly for leases, I think you must be aware about the latest standard that has come in 2019, leases, Ind AS 116. We wrote a book on that, treatise on leases.
which is particularly on leases only, and it talks about IGAP, Ind AS, IFRS, US GAAP, and everything about leases basically. So basically, leases has become so impactful because the change that it has brought. Earlier, the operating and financing leases were classified for the lessees, but now, as per new standard, there is no classification required. Lessees are not going to classify the leases into financing or operating leases. Everything is kind of a financing lease. Why? Because of the substance over form. Because earlier the operating leases were not shown on the balance sheet, right? It was just accounted for on straight line basis. But now all the leases are to be treated as financing activities, and now all the leases are to be shown on balance sheet. This was brought in. Why? Because earlier a lot of companies had leases, and which were classified as operating leases, and which basically meant that they had obligation to pay some money, right? And which was not shown on the balance sheet. The substance of that transaction was, it was a financing activity. It was a financing activity, right? They had taken some asset and now they are going to pay it in bits and pieces, right? They have a contractual obligation to pay, but it was not shown on the balance sheet altogether. But now, as per new standard, it is going to be shown on the balance sheet. Finance cost is going to be accrued on that. So it was a major change. I think 1st April 2019 was maybe the like worst day for the companies which had major assets on leases. For example, the airlines, they run aircrafts on lease basis, right? So huge liability is added to their financials. Yes, so if anyone has any doubt, otherwise we will move on. Okay, no query, moving on. Can you elaborate on business combinations? So basically, business combinations now, in case of business combinations, the assets and liabilities are recorded at fair value. Earlier, it was on book value, right? And there is no merger or purchase method. There is just one concept, that you have to book the assets and liabilities on fair value. Can you explain the transition provision of Ind AS 116? See, the transition provision, basically, they have given certain practical expedients that you can call as relaxations in certain requirements. But yes, yes, the treatment is majorly like that only, that the companies are required to add a liability, and for whatever assets they have taken on lease, they have to recognize a asset for that. If a lease period is less than 12 months, then it is not required to be treated as finance lease. Yes, correctly said. For there are two exceptions or exemptions in Ind AS 116, which is of short-term lease and leases of low value. Um, uh, Short-term lease and leases of low value are not to be treated as finance leases. Rather, they can be treated as accounted for on straight line basis. Thank you. Okay. Moving on, Ind AS requires extensive use. Okay, just a minute. I've got one more query. How can we measure low value? So, so there is no limit or threshold given in the standard. It is completely based on the nature of the asset and the value of the asset. One thing that is given in the standard is it has to be low for all the companies. Like assets like mobile phone, laptops, only these assets can be treated as low value. And asset needs to be the value needs to be look at when the asset is new. Say you have got a second hand phone, right? It does not mean it's a low value. You have to see when the asset is new. You have got a second hand car, but the car is worth 20 lakhs. It's not a low value asset, right? So there is no threshold given, say 5,000 ka asset hai, tabhi low value hai. There's no concept like that, but it totally depends upon the nature of the asset and when the asset was new. Yeah. So moving on, Ind AS requires extensive use of management judgment as these standards are principle based rather than rule based. As I told you, a lot of evaluation and analysis is required for any transaction now, and not just a rule is given to how to account for it, but a lot of discussion and a lot of estimations are required. Next is additional guidance is given with respect to financial instruments, SBP, agriculture, hyperinflationary economies, insurance contracts, fair value measurement, regulatory deferral accounts, SCA, and combination under common control. So basically, Ind AS has brought a lot of new concepts, a lot of guidance on specific issues, which was not there in IGAP. Since as in IGAP, there was no standard on financial instrument, there was just a guidance note on derivatives. Then a share-based payment, which are ESOPs in short. ESOPs also, there was no standard earlier. There was just a guidance note, and now a particular standard is there. Agriculture, for all the companies which have agriculture-based operations, there was no guidance earlier at all. But now there's a standard on agriculture. Now the standard tells you how to value a calf. If there's a cow and it delivers a baby, how to value that baby, that is also given in the standard. So I think the Ind AS has brought a lot of wide coverage of guidance, and it's very, very useful for all the companies. Specific guidance which was highly required. So that's about impact on financial statements. I hope it was useful, because now we are going to move on to Schedule 3, which was the second part of this session. Okay, I've got one more query. If in a lease agreement there is no given a lock-in period, then Ind AS ordinance it's applicable for whole lease period or anything else. So the query is not a bit clear, but what I can understand is the lock-in period is not given, and you're saying the lease is open-ended. If the lease is open-ended, I think the lease term needs to be derived basis the intention of the companies, the lessee and the lessor. If like they expect it to run more than 12 months, then I think the treatment will be as usual. Yeah, okay, so now moving on to the Schedule 3. First of all, let me tell you what Schedule 3 is. Schedule 3 is nothing but it gives you a format of balance sheet, a statement of P&L, and the disclosure requirements, certain notes or general instructions on how to prepare or present the financial statements. Right, now, what is the requirement of Schedule 3 and where does it come from? It comes from Companies Act 2013, and earlier it was 1956. Section 129 of the Companies Act requires the companies to prepare financial statements which give a true and fair view, and they need to be in compliance with Schedule 3. So Schedule 3 comes from the Companies Act, Section 129 of the Companies Act. Schedule 3 is now called as Schedule 3. Earlier in Companies Act 1956, it was Schedule 6. So I'll just walk you through all the changes that have been made in the schedule. Earlier, when we were kids, we all heard about Schedule 6, right? Which used to give us a vertical format of balance sheet and a horizontal format of balance sheet. There was no fixed format. It gave you both the options. But then in 2011, so I'll tell you, Ind AS were first planned to be implemented from 2011. And that is why the Schedule 6 was revised in order to bring in changes in financial statements, to introduce the vertical format of the balance sheet, and to align the format with the international presentation of the financial statements, because Ind AS were converged with IFRS, which is an international level of standards, right? And we had to give financial statements which looked like foreign financials, and hence the schedule 6 was revised, and on 28th February 2011 it was introduced. Now on 28th February 2012, this revised schedule 6 brought in major changes, like it completely removed the horizontal form of balance sheet. Only the vertical format was applied. It was only vertical format which was given in the schedule. Then in addition to it, the classification of current and non-current, the assets and liabilities were required to be classified in current and non-current. It was first introduced in revised schedule 6. Earlier it was not a requirement in schedule 6, the old schedule 6. Then later on, the schedule 3 was introduced when Companies Act changed. Companies Act 2013 was enacted, and schedule 3 was just a minute, I am getting a query. If there is conflict between schedule 3 and Ind AS, and what provisions would prevail? Schedule 3 requirement is minimum, and if there, yeah, so the answer has been given. Yeah. Schedule 3 to the Companies Act 2013 was introduced on 26th March 2014, and it was applicable on all the companies which were preparing its financial statements as per IGAAP, which is basically the Accounting Standards Rule 2006, right? Then later on, now the 26th March 2014 schedule was only the Division 1, which was for companies which were preparing financials as per IGAAP. Now, when the Ind AS were introduced in 2015, on 6th April 2016, Division 2 was introduced, which is basically for companies other than NBFCs which are preparing financials as per Ind AS. Then later on in 2018, Division 3, which is for NBFCs, was introduced. And after that, the required amendments were made to Division 1, 2, and 3. Now, to give you a walkthrough of this, I can show you the financial statements of Hero Honda Motors. Basically, this is the balance sheet as on 31st March 2010. This is as per the old schedule 6. Now, I am going to ask you a question. You have to tell me the difference between this balance sheet and this balance sheet. This is basically as on 2012, which is prepared as per the revised schedule 6. Okay, this is old schedule 6 and this is revised schedule 6. So what changes can you notice? I'll just show it for 5 minutes and then move on to that one. This is as per revised schedule 6. Right, so a lot of people have correctly noticed. First of all, the bifurcation of current and non-current. In this balance sheet, what you can see is sources of funds and the application of funds instead of equity, liability, and assets. Then there is no bifurcation of current, non-current. The schedules are prepared. In revised schedule 6, the notes were introduced instead of schedule, right? Then obviously the items, as you can see, the fixed asset, the gross block, depreciation, and net block is shown on the face of balance sheet. Whereas in revised schedule 6, if you can see, the fixed asset, tangible assets is here, and then a schedule 11 is given to show the gross block and net block and everything. this. This is the schedule of fixed asset that is given as per revised schedule 6. But in old schedule 6, it was given on the face of balance sheet. The schedule is also given, but in revised schedule 6, the movement is not shown on the face of balance sheet. So, yeah. Then next, I think, is statement of profit and loss. The nomenclature was changed for the P&L. P&L account, earlier it was used P&L account, but now in revised schedule 6, statement of profit and loss was used. So yes, I think it is very clear now that how the financials, the look of financials has changed over the period of time. This is the old schedule 6, this is revised schedule 6, and then this is the schedule 3 as per Companies Act 2013. Now there is no much difference between revised schedule 6 and schedule 3 as per Companies Act 13, but obviously a slight changes. See, this is the view of schedule 3. Yeah. Then this is schedule 3 for 2015. That means before the Ind AS were implemented, before the Ind AS was introduced, right? Ind AS were made applicable from 1st April 2015 on voluntary basis and from 1st April 2016 on mandatory basis. That means these financial statements are in compliance with IGAAP. That means division 1 of the schedule 3. Now we are clear that there are 3 divisions of schedule 3 under the Companies Act 2013. Division 1 for IGAAP financials, division 2 for Ind AS financials, and division 3 for NBFC Ind AS financials. Right, so this for 31st March 2015 is for IGAAP, yani ki division 1 to the schedule 3. Now when Hero Motors moved to Ind AS from 1st April 2016, this is how their balance sheet looked like. This is as per Ind AS, division 2 to the schedule 3. Now here you can see the equity and liability and asset, the order has been turned upside down. The asset has come first and equity and liability has gone down. Right, so this is a prima facie assessment that, you know, the company is complying with Ind AS when the assets come first and liabilities and equity come later on. Okay, so now I think this is this must have helped you a little bit to understand, to get an overview of what I'm talking about, what schedule 3 is all about, and how the changes in the look of financials has been from time to time. Now we are here to discuss the latest amendments that have been notified by MCA on 24th March 2021. So moving on to the first amendment. Right. Okay. So first of all, let me clear this, that the amendments have been brought in division 1, 2, and 3. All of these divisions have been amended. But in this session, I'm going to deep dive division 2 amendments only. Why? Because this is applicable for the Ind AS companies other than NBFCs. I will keep telling you from for every amendment, whether it is for division 1 and 3 also. Otherwise, there are certain additional amendments also in division 1 and division 3, which we are not going to discuss in this session. We will cover mostly division 2, and whatever the common amendments are, that we will also discuss. Shagun is asking what change came in division 3. So division 3 is basically for the NBFCs only, which are complying with Ind AS, and the format of financials is quite different, because the financial and non-financial, like the bifurcation is into financing and non-financing. So you can view the division 3 to the schedule 3 to get an overall view of how the financials of NBFC looks. Right, so first amendment is into the rounding off. It is in general instructions to the schedule 3. And basically the amendment says that instead of looking at the turnover for rounding off, we need to look at the total income. So to give you a brief background, in India, rounding off is compulsory. That means for the companies which have total income less than 100 crore rupees, they need to round off all the numbers in their financials to the nearest hundreds, thousands, lakhs, or millions, or decimals thereof. And for companies having more than 100 crore rupees, then to the nearest lakhs, millions, crores, or decimals thereof. So the rounding off is compulsory in case of Ind AS, and earlier it was looked on the basis of turnover, but now it is looked on the basis of the total income. Right now, the definition of total income is not clear, and maybe we can wait for ICI to clear on that part. But for now, what we can understand is, in the statement of profit and loss, revenue from operations comes, then other income comes, and the total income comes. So maybe the total income can be taken from there to evaluate on the rounding off. Next amendment has come in the lease liabilities. Basically, earlier, the long-term maturities of finance lease obligation was included in borrowings part, and the current maturities of finance obligations was included in the other financial liabilities. But now, when the Ind AS 116 has been introduced, finance these two bifurcations have been removed, and only the lease liabilities, the term lease liabilities, has been included in the current and non-current financial liabilities. Basically, nothing is included in the borrowings now. Okay, so next amendment that has come is on the statement of changes in equity that we have that I told you about. Basically, it shows the movement of equity share capital and other equity. The change that has come is these two heads have been added in the prescribed format. And what are these? Basically, the changes in equity share capital due to prior period errors is required to be shown separately now. And if there is any prior period error, like if there is any change in equity share capital due to prior period error, then there will be a restated balance, restated opening balance. So first of all, opening balance, then if there has been any change due to prior period error, then the adjustment will be the restated balance at the beginning, and then the changes in equity during the year, and then the closing balance. So basically, these two heads have been added to the prescribed format of the changes in equity share capital. Lease liability will be a head. Yes, Mr. Yogesh, lease liability will be a subhead in current and non-current financial liabilities. So basically, the change that that has been brought in statement of changes in equity is for division 2 and division 3. That means for Ind AS non-NBFCs and Ind AS NBFC companies. And this change, this reconciliation or this format is required to be given for previous reporting period also. So basically, these amendments, all these amendments are applicable from 1st April 2021. That means the first financials will be that will be prepared in accordance with these standards will be for 31st March 2022, right? But there are some changes that you need to give for previous period also, that as a comparative information. So this change, this movement of changes in equity share capital will be given for previous reporting period also. That means for 31st March 2021 also the companies will need to give this information. Sorry, what is the difference between opening balance and registered opening balance? Not, I think you mean restated opening balance. So the difference will be of the change due to any prior period error. Okay, if the company has any change due to prior period error, then only there will be a difference between the opening balance and the restated opening balance. Now moving on, there is a requirement that has been added for PPE and intangible assets. Basically, in addition to giving reconciliation of gross and net carrying amounts, the company also needs to disclose the amount of change due to revaluation. And this is required only when the change is 10% or more of the aggregate of the net carrying value of each class of PP or the intangible asset. right? Now, this change has been brought to view the change in like change in revaluation uh, upfront. Why? Because what happened was earlier, what happened was whenever there was an upside or downside due to revaluation, it was adjusted within addition column or the adjustment column. It was not understandable by looking at the schedule of PPE that what has been the change, what has been the impact of revaluation. But now, by adding this particular column in the schedule, I think it will be very clear, prima facie, to uh, to understand what the revaluation impact has been on the company, right? And now this amendment is in division 1 also. That means the companies that are preparing financials as per IGAP will also be required to add this column in the schedule of their PP and intangible assets. Schedule division 2 obviously for the companies having Ind AS, and schedule 3 division 3 also, that means for the NBFC Ind AS financials. Right now, also, all these changes have been brought to align with the Caro 2020. So you must be like some of you might be aware of Caro 2020, which is the new Caro, which will be which was to be implemented earlier, but now it has been deferred and will be introduced from 1st April 2021. Right, so on financials of 31st March 2022, Caro 2020 will be applied. Now, these all these changes that I'm talking about, some of these have been brought in to align with Caro 2020, because auditor is now required to check the change due to revaluation. That is why this change has been brought in schedule 3 also, so that first of all the disclosure should be made by the management and then the auditor should check it. Right, if the management is not only not disclosing it, then how the auditor will check it? That is why the schedule 3 has been changed and amended to align it with Caro 2020, so that the onus of such disclosures comes on the management first, and then the auditor gives its view and check it, and then report it in the audit report. Right, so this is basically the background of these changes. So PP and intangible asset, this amendment is also in division 1, 2, 3, and it is also there in the Caro 2020. Now, next changes, the current maturities of long-term borrowings and long-term debt is now to be disclosed separately under the headings borrowings. Earlier, it was shown in other financial liabilities, but now it will be a part of borrowings. Next is the security deposits. So basically, earlier the security deposits were included in the loan head in the balance sheet, but now it will be included in other financial assets. Next is, now the companies are required to give a shareholding pattern of the promoters also. They need to disclose the promoter name, the number of shares, the percentage of shares, and whatever the change has been during the year in terms of percentage. Now, again, this disclosure requirement is in division 1 for IGAP companies, Ind AS companies, and NBFC Ind AS companies also. Further, now the companies are required to disclose the usage or the purpose of the borrowings. So basically, when the company has not used the borrowings from banks or financial institutions for a specific purpose for which it was taken, the company is now required to disclose the details of where they have been utilized. Right. So this disclosure requirement is for Ind AS companies and NBFC Ind AS companies, and also it is there in Caro 2020. So auditor is also required to check this, and the auditor is also required to report whether the company has given a disclosure on this and where the borrowings have been utilized, if not utilized for the specific purpose. Moving on, so I think this is a very important amendment that has been brought for aging of trade receivables and trade payables. Earlier, only the classification of considered good and all was given, but now the companies are required to bifurcate the trade receivables, first of all in disputed and undisputed, and then they need to give a proper aging from the due date of payment, right? Not from the due date of billing, but the due date, not from the date of billing, but from the due date of payment. They need to give an aging for trade receivables in the shown buckets of less than 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and more than 3 years. And for trade payables, they need to bifurcate again in disputed and undisputed trade payables, and also for MSME and others separately. The aging will be given in the bucket of less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and more than 3 years. I think this disclosure will have a major impact, because if any company shows a trade payable in the bucket of more than 3 years for MSME, then everyone knows that what the impact is, right? As per the MSME rules, MSME Act, the repercussions are pretty bad. Okay, I've got a one query. Date of payment means after considering period allowed, right? Yes, the credit period. Okay, so those were the changes that were brought for the balance sheet. Now, some additional regulatory information needs to be provided by the companies. This is completely in line with the CARO 2020, because if the onus is on the auditors, then first the onus should come on the management, right? So the first amendment that has come is the requirement to disclose immovable properties whose title deeds are not held in the name of the company. Right, so in CARO, earlier CARO was also required to report this, but it was not for the management. So now it has been added for management also, and they need to disclose the details of immovable properties whose title deeds are not held in the name of the company, and what all disclosures are required. First of all, the relevant items, say whether it's a PPE or it's an investment property, or whatever the nature of the asset is, and then the gross carrying value, then title deeds held in the name of whom, the person in, or the entity in whose name the title deed has been held, then whether the title deed holder is a promoter, director, or relative or employee of the promoter or director. Then property held since which date and reason for not holding in the name of the company, and also they need to indicate whether the property is in dispute. So I think all these disclosures are required now from the company, from the management, whenever there is a immovable property whose title deed is not held in the name of the company. And again, this is for division 1, 2, 3, like all for IGAP, Ind AS, NBFC Ind AS. All the companies are required to disclose this. Yes, for leasehold properties also. Disclosure with respect to fair valuation and revaluation. So basically, as per Companies Act, the requirement is whenever there has to be a valuation of assets, it will be done by the registered valuer as per the company rules, right? But but the companies were following it or not, it was like unknown. But now the companies are required to disclose it if they have if they've got the properties revalued or valued, then they need to disclose whether the revaluation was done by the registered valuer or not. And again, this is for division 1, 2, and 3. All the companies are required to disclose this fact now. Moving on, the advances, the loans or advances granted to promoters, directors, KMPs, and the related parties. So basically, I think this is a very impactful change that has been brought. Here, the companies are required to disclose certain items for the loans or advances. Mind it, the advances are also included, which are actually in the nature of loans, right? which are granted to promoters, directors, KMPs, and the related parties, which are as per the definition of Companies Act. That means the transaction has to be as per the Companies Act, but the condition are such that whether it is repayable on demand, or the terms or the period of repayment is not specified. Okay, whenever there is such a case, the company needs to provide this disclosure, and they need to disclose the amount of the loan or advance, which is in the nature of loan, and the percentage of such loan or advance in terms of the total loan or advance. Right. So I think this is a very impactful change, because now it will disclose all the advances that companies give to its subsidiaries or known entities. And again, this disclosure requirement is for division 1, 2, and 3. And again, it is also a change in CARO 2020, and auditors will be required to report on this particular disclosure. Next is on the aging of CWIP and intangible assets under development. So basically, under the assets head and non-current assets head of the balance sheet, you can see there are line items like capital work in progress and intangible assets under development. For these two items, the company is now required to give an aging. Now, why this aging schedule is required? Maybe because there are certain companies which are having CWIP from like for more than 6-7 years, right? So now the government wants to look at why they are due from such long period, whether the project is in progress or it has been temporarily suspended, because it will impact the capitalization of the borrowing cost and the capitalization of the other costs, right? If any item is in CWIP for so long and the company is capitalizing the cost regularly, then that is not as per, like, that is not appropriate, right? Hence, I think this disclosure is required, and the companies are required to bifurcate the projects into two parts: first in progress, and for those which are temporarily suspended. And the aging needs to be given in the bucket of 1 year, 1 to 2 year, 2 to 3 year, and more than 3 years. Also, when there are cases where the completion is overdue or the cost has exceeded the original plan, in that case also the aging needs to be given. And for projects which have been suspended, the activity has been suspended, that also needs to be separately disclosed. Further, the disclosure is required in case there is any proceeding has been initiated or pending against the company for holding any Benami property, right? So the companies are required to disclose the details of such property, the amount thereof, the details of beneficiaries, and if the property is in the books, then reference will be given to the balance sheet item. Then if the property is not in the books, then the fact needs to be stated. And where there are proceedings against the company under this law, then the details needs to be given, and further the nature of proceedings, the status of the same, and the company's view on same. Like, so many disclosures are required for like if there is any proceeding initiated. Mind it that disclosure is required only when there is a proceeding initiated or pending against the company under Benami company. Okay, I've got one doubt. Will anyone give this information? Yes, so I think since this has been made mandatory and regulatory, so companies will have to give this information. If not, then that is definitely a concealment of information, and which is not as per the law. And obviously the onus is on the auditors also, because in CARO 2020 this is also a part of CARO, so auditors will have to get into the details of it. I think this is definitely an additional work. So many efforts will be put in by the management and definitely by the auditors, because even if the information is given by the management, then how the auditor is going to check it, that is also a question. Now moving on, disclosure with respect to the borrowings. Yes. Disclosures with respect to borrowings from banks or financial institutions. So basically, in this, the government requires the companies to disclose to disclose that whether the statement of current assets which are filed with the bank are in agreement with the books or not. So basically, we all are like aware about it, that how the companies are taking loans from the banks, and working capital loans and all. But whatever the statements that are required to be filed by the company to the bank, the statements are like, no one knows about the accuracy of those statements, right? And the banks are being looted on that part, and hence I think this disclosure is required, and the government has added this to now the management will only disclose whether those statements that have been filed with the bank, whether they are in agreement with the books or not. Second is, if they are not in agreement, then obviously a reconciliation needs to be given by the company, and the reason for the discrepancies. Okay, now this is also in for like NBFC index companies, and it is also a part of Caro. But in Caro, there is a limit that if the working capital is in excess of 5 crores, then only the auditor is required to report this. Otherwise, auditor can pass. Okay, so next requirement is on willful defaulter. So the company, whenever the company is declared as a willful defaulter by any bank or any financial institution or any other lender, then the company needs to give details such as the date of declaration as willful defaulter and the details of the defaults, like the amount and the nature of default needs to be given. And this is also a requirement in Caro 20, so auditor also needs to comment on this. Next is the relationship with stock of companies. This has been added for division 1, 2, and 3. And where the company has any transactions with the company's stock of under section 248 of the Companies Act 13 or 560 under 1956, the companies need to disclose the name of the stock of company, the nature of transaction, like say if it's a if any receivable is there or any payable is there, then that needs to be disclosed, the balance outstanding and the relationship with the stock of company. So if the stock of company was a shareholder, or the company is a shareholder in the stock of company, all those relationships also need to be disclosed. Further, the registration of charges or satisfaction with the ROC, this requirement is there. The company needs to disclose if any charges or satisfaction yet to be registered with ROC beyond the statutory period, then details and reasons are need to be given. Then compliance with number of layers of companies, where the company has not complied with the number of layers prescribed under section 287 of the company's rules, the name and CIN of the company beyond the specified layers and relationship or extent of holding of the company in such downstream companies needs to be disclosed. Then compliance with approved schemes or arrangements. Whenever there is approved scheme or arrangement, then the company needs to give details of that, and whether the arrangement has been accounted for in the books of accounts in accordance with the scheme and accounting standard. And whenever there is a deviation, the company needs to explain the deviations. Okay, moving on, I think this is one of the very important amendment that has been brought by the government on the key ratios that the company now needs to disclose. Now, in addition to disclosing these key ratios, the government also wants the companies to explain what has been included in the numerator and denominator for computing this ratio. Right. So I think a lot of details needs to be given here, because and it might vary from company to company, although the formula for these ratios are standard for some of the ratios, say current ratio, debt equity ratio and all, but it might vary in some cases. Now, in addition to it, the company also needs to explain the change in ratio whenever the change is more than 25% as compared to the preceding year. So that means for financial year 2021-22, the company needs to disclose ratios as on 31st March 2021 also. So for whoever is present here and preparing financials as per Ind AS, maybe you can compute these ratios now for balances as on 31st March 2021. Now further, this amendment has been brought, this disclosure requirement has been brought for the utilization of borrowed fund and share premium. Basically, this says that where a company has advanced or loaned or invested funds, that means either it has given the funds or it has invested the funds, and in like the funds may be borrowed funds or it may be share premium or any other source or kind of funds to any other person or entity, including foreign entities, right? And all of these will be called as intermediaries for this purpose, with an understanding that the intermediary shall directly or indirectly lend or invest in other person or entity identified in any manner whatsoever by or on behalf of the company. That means the ultimate beneficiary. So for say example, company A has given some loan to company B with an understanding that B will further give this loan to C. So C in this case is the ultimate beneficiary. B is the intermediary, right? So the disclosures that need to be given by the company is the date and amount of fund that has been loaned or advanced or invested in the intermediary. That means A will give a disclosure that how much has been given to B, and then further the date and amount of fund further advanced or loaned by the intermediary to the ultimate beneficiary. That means A now will have to deep dive into the financials of B and will have to see that where those funds are further invested or loaned, right? So basically A will deep dive in these financials also. And this is the other way around also. If the company has received any fund from any other company with an understanding to invest in any other further ultimate beneficiary, in that case also the company needs to give these disclosures, right? And all these disclosures goes for the amount advanced, loaned or invested, or any guarantee given. So any guarantee, if A has given any guarantee to B to further guarantee to C, right, that also needs to be disclosed. Right. Now we have come to the statement of profit and loss. The first disclosure requirement that has been added is grants or donations received, and this is only for Section 8 companies, so it might not be relevant for many of you. So the most important disclosure requirement that has been introduced in P&L is separate disclosure for undisclosed income. So basically the company needs to give details of any transaction that is not recorded in the books and that has been surrendered or disclosed as income during the year in a tax assessment. So basically in any tax assessment, if any income or asset is surrendered or disclosed as income, the company needs to give details in the financial statements, right? And there is an exception to it, that if there is any immunity from such disclosure under any scheme or whatsoever, then the company may not give the disclosure, but otherwise the company needs to disclose this. Also, the company needs to state whether the previously unrecorded income or and related assets have been properly recorded in the books of accounts during the years. So that means that during the year, the company needs to look at the previous tax assessments also, right? Whatever the tax assessment and whatever the undisclosed income has been surrendered or assets has been surrendered during those tax assessments, the company needs to declare that whether though all those undisclosed income have been now recorded or not. And this is a requirement in CARO 20 also, so I think the auditor will also deep dive into it. Yes, the foreign party means any foreign entity. So Yogesh is asking, more important it is how it has been dealt in the books of accounts, right? Like how, whether it has been recorded or not, basically that is more important. Now, on the part of CSR, the company needs to disclose the amount which is, so basically all these disclosures regarding CSR was there in section 135 always, and but companies did not disclose it very prominently. So I think by introducing this disclosure requirement in Schedule 3 will require the companies to disclose it more prominently. So what the disclosure requirement is that the companies need to disclose the amount that is required to be spent by the company during the year as per section 135, then the amount of actual expenditure done, and the shortfall if there is any, and the shortfall of the previous year, the reason for shortfall, the nature of the CSR activities, and the details of the related party transactions. So basically, if, for example, a contribution to a trust controlled by the company in relation to CSR expenditure, right? So all the details with regard to related party transaction for CSR needs to be disclosed. Further, where a provision is made in respect to a liability incurred by entering into contractual obligation, the movement in the provision during the year shall be shown separately. So basically, a whole lot of separate disclosure needs to be given on CSR. Now, last disclosure requirement is on cryptocurrency. And so basically, the last is on cryptocurrency or virtual currency. And this disclosure requirement is for IGAP financials, Indes, and NBFC Indes financials. And basically, in this disclosure, the companies are required to disclose if they have traded or invested. So basically, traded or invested in cryptocurrency or any virtual currency during the financial year, they need to disclose the profit or loss on that transaction, and the currency, the amount of currency held as at the reporting date, and the deposits or advances from any person for the purpose of trading or investing in the cryptocurrency. So basically, although cryptocurrency is not allowed as per RBI, but still the companies have traded into it, companies have accepted the payments into cryptocurrency, and I think with this disclosure, all those transactions will come out. So that's all from my side, from the amendment part. Sumitsa, we can move ahead.
Chandni, you can take 3 if any, then we can close the session.
Yeah, sure. So I think we have, if there is any open query, maybe you can see.
Yes, I'm unmuting everybody. So now participants are allowed to ask query.
I think one query is left from Uma. Yeah, with respect to CSR rules 2021 also comes into effect from 1st April 21, and the question not related to financial reporting. Would like to ask this: can we claim ITC on CSR expenses incurred? I'm sorry, I'm not the right person to ask about GST and all. So maybe you can ask this to the expert. I'm not an expert of it.
Hello, Ms. Chandni. This is Vikas Bansal.
Hi, Vikas.
Hi. Regarding the loan transaction, which is to be shown under the new transactions or new changes into the financial, as into which company I am managing, in that so many transactions related to the loans taken and the givens and all like that to the various companies.
Mhm.
So those related transactions to be shown individually type or how it is to be present as per the recent changes. If you could elaborate on that. Means suppose one my company is taking loan from its holding company and giving to its subsidiaries or to the other various company for the different reasons as a support or to the other reasons also. So on the each closer of the financial year, what amount pending to my next investing companies, that to be shown only, or the purpose, or what is the from money came and to whom it is given, all detail to be disclosed?
So basically, with regard to the recent amendments, I think with regard to loans and advances, there is one requirement that if it's been granted to the promoters or directors or KMP or the related parties, as you have mentioned, but if the terms are not specified in term, like the repayment terms are not specified, or if it's repayable on demand, then only that disclosure is required.
No, but in the related parties, terms are defined, but anyways, it will be like a postponement or the extension of the loan every time it happens.
Mhm.
So definitely as per the agreement, terms are defined that is within 3 years or within 1 year.
Then that is fine. Like that amendment is only for the loans, in which case if the loan is repayable on demand or whether the repayment terms are not specified. If it's specified, then it's not a problem. Any other question? How the virtual currency is valued? There is no such guidance on it yet. We all are waiting on for this. How PNL can be calculated on crypto virtual currency, how auditor can value it. So, Mr. Atul, I think there is no such guidance yet, but obviously, whatever the actual PNL has been, whatever the actual profit or loss has been made by the company, the company needs to disclose that. We are not sure that how the auditor will value it. There is no such guidance yet, but definitely we are waiting any guidance from the ICAI. Because now that amendment has been brought, the disclosures required in the financials, then definitely some guidance should come. Any other query?
Umaji asked one query regarding trade payable aging schedule.
Yeah, do we need to show unbilled bills as well?
No, I don't think so.
So I think the requirement for division 2 is very clear that the undisputed and disputed trade payables needs to be disclosed.
But unbilled amount will not come under this
Yeah.
reporting. Regarding CSR, we will get back to you tomorrow. CSR eligibility credit, GST credit on CSR eligibility. And one more query regarding CSR. Is there an amendment on unspent CSR amount? Yes, Nidhi, there is an amendment regarding unspent CSR amount that has mandatorily you have to transfer to the government as per the Schedule 7, Prime Minister Relief Fund or PM Care Fund, if it is unspent by the end of the 31st March.
So on the query of OG, if we're asking like unbilled amount needs to be actually showed separately.
Right. So can we close the session or just a minute? Thank you. CCD are debt instrument or equity instrument? Chandni.
CCDs are debt instruments or equity instruments. Again, Mr. Surya, this needs to be evaluated basis the terms of the CCDs. Generally, these are the compound financial instruments. And when we say it's a compound financial instrument, it's a debt instrument plus an equity instrument. So the values need to be derived for both, and the accounting will be for debt instrument as per the financial liability and equity instrument as per equity.
Hello.
My doubt is whether fair valuation adjustment will come under OCI or P&L.
So again, for the fair value changes in financial liabilities, it never comes in OCI. And also for the equity part, it will not come in OCI. Why? Because the fair value, the method of classification for fair value through OCI is for investment in equity shares. So for debt instruments, the changes in fair value always go to P&L.
So Chandni, can we close the session?
Yeah, I guess if no one has any
Yeah,
further.
thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt. There one query related to the disclosure part as per recent changes. As there are so many changes comes into the picture related to like current maturity changes, trade payables showing and all. So whether we need to regroup also for the previous year figures as into the next financials of any of the company. So there could be the huge changes into the regrouping. Like for current maturities, earlier it was showing on the financial liabilities. Now it will be shown under separately. So there will be each and such type of every transaction to be regrouped or reclassified again as a comparative part.
Right. Yes. Definitely it will be required.
Okay.
So thank you very much for active participant by everyone. And tomorrow we have session by C. Ankit Kaushik ji on the revenue accounting in days 1 and 5. So let's join timely 6 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you, Chandni, for your wonderful and interactive discussion as always. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.